to Kidmissing TV. Today I'm going to talk about a case that you might be familiar with or might have heard of if you're a fan of the show Unsolved Mysteries, because it was featured. In fact, I wrote down when it was featured because it was featured in different seasons depending on the host. It was featured in Season 5 with Robert Stack and Season 2 with Dennis Farina. It was the unsolved murder of 7-year-old Gary Grant Jr. In Atlantic City, New Jersey. His father was a policeman. He was murdered on January 12, 1984. Initially, a friend of his with some developmental disabilities was brought in and questioned in such a way that they got him to confess, even though they know he didn't do it now. In fact, the day this boy was supposed to go to court to see whether his confession could be used, which it couldn't, someone actually wrote on Gary Sr.'s patrol car. And they wrote, "Gary Grant Jr. lives, I still killed him." Another will die January 12th if all goes right. To me, even the wording is weird. But to get back to the beginning of the story, before he was killed, his father was a policeman, as I mentioned. His parents were separated. And he got up that morning and had breakfast with his mom. He decided to go out and play and stuff because it was one of those teacher orientation days, so they didn't have school. And he told his mother that he had an appointment. Strange wording for a 7-year-old. His mother laughed it off. And he trotted off and went to play. Mom didn't think much more of it. About 4:30 she was concerned, but she didn't panic. She didn't panic until about 6:30, when she hadn't heard a darn thing from him. Hadn't seen him or anything. In January it would be getting dark. So she called her estranged husband and asked him if he would go looking. He went looking. About 2 days later, less than 48 hours later really, he pulled up to a scene in an alleyway, and they wouldn't let him near it. It would be inappropriate because it was the murder of his own son. So they wouldn't let him. Obviously he couldn't investigate or anything. Then they questioned Boo Mason. They didn't know how to question a handicapped person, and it just was a nightmare. A few weeks after the note was scrawled on the officer's car, another note was scratched somehow onto a sidewalk. "Gary Grant Jr. lives. I still killed him. Son of a pig cop. Payback is an M.F. Wow. I'll be sure and give you the phone numbers for the investigating agencies at the end of this case summary. As time went on, they figured out that Gary had been beaten with a pipe, which they found when they went back to the scene. They didn't initially find it. Now, was he killed in retaliation for one of his father's cases? Don't know. The problem is that, first of all, we don't know who the killer was for sure. Did anyone else know about this mystery appointment? There are so many questions. And as I mentioned, this case was on Unsolved Mysteries. Oh, and I'm very sorry. It was Robert Stack. It was not Season 5. It was actually Season 6. and season 2 with Dennis Farina, as I mentioned earlier. In 1986, the killer called 911 and asked if he could collect the reward money if he turned himself in. Dude, it doesn't work that way. Just the, pardon the language, for lack of a better term, balls to do that is just unfathomable. He then told the dispatcher that they would never catch him. In 2011, another man called and claimed that his friend was the killer. He knew that Gary had been bludgeoned and had had a meeting or appointment or something that day. He said that his friend did it because of problems, again, with Gary's father. Gary Sr. says friend moved out of his parents' home right after, and never looked back. The friend's name has not been released. Dad says he never had a problem with the man. He lived in his jurisdiction and in the area that he patrolled, but he had never come in contact with him in a criminal manner or a criminal matter. So he couldn't imagine what he would have against him. The man whose friend called about it was discovered, because he gave the name of the friend, that his friend had sexually abused a child under the age of 5 in 2011 and pled it down in 2013. To me, this case here is so solvable. And if you know what happened to Gary, you can call the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office at 1-609-909-7800. That's 1-609-909-7800. Or Crime Stoppers at 1-609-652-1234. 1-609-652-1234. Or Crime Stoppers 800 number, 1-800-658-8477. 1-800-658-8477. I just feel so badly that his father may have thought that in some way his job got his little tiny boy killed, and I don't know that that's the case. What was the reason? And it's interesting that Boo Mason, even after all these years, said, no, we were supposed to meet on Thursday after school, the day before this happened, and he never showed up. It makes you wonder if this guy, who obviously was abusing children, may have been grooming him, and, meeting him for, nefarious reasons, and those were the reasons he missed his play date. I hate that term. I'm old-fashioned, but that's what they call it. And that was the meeting or appointment that he had that day, was with that man. It's all speculation, of course. But again, thank you so much for listening to Gary's case. I've been wanting to do this video actually for a very long time. I recently actually re-watched it on Unsolved Mysteries in preparation for this video. And I know this case is solvable, guys. We can do this. Thank you so much. God bless.